Hit record, because in the words of Onyx, give me the microphone before I bust in my pants.
Okay, you've got it.
Did I tell you that, until fairly recently, I thought he was talking about pooping in his pants, and then one day, not having heard the song for years, it just occurred to me that it's like, oh no, it's not poop he's talking about.
Right.
You're listening to the Jaunty Mantis. Stay a while and listen. Hi, everybody. I'm Jesse, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Maddie. Say hello, Maddie.
Hello.
We are a podcast where, I've already messed it up. Creative questions for curious gamers is our tagline. And we are here in season 4 where we are answering listener questions. Today we have an anonymous question. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask that anonymous question to my best friend here. Hey, Maddie.
Yes, sir.
How difficult should my encounters be?
That is a great question. I don't have a surefire answer for this because I think this depends on the system that you're using. So are we going to just assume this person is using 5e? Because I know this person did not want their name mentioned on the podcast. I'm just going to go and assume it's 5e because it's the world's most popular role-playing game. There's
probably
the most
a safe assumption.
There's the most amount of content created for D&D online. So maybe we could do a special segment about maybe for other games, but let's just assume it's 5e Dungeons and Dragons. Have you ever used the encounter builder in D&D Beyond?
I have used the encounter builder in D&D Beyond. You just do make the slightest wink at it and the bar goes orange and it says deadly. And I'm like, but it's 5 kobolds.
Have you ever done this manually using the system in a past version of D&D?
Yeah, well, in 3.5, you could just stack them up together. The only thing complicated about encounter level was effective encounter level for the Savage Species game, a system that apparently only I am capable of mastering.
That's right.
So yeah, that was just some simple addition with the monsters. But I mean, I see what they did in 5e. With trying to tune it down to be like, oh no, but if you add more monsters, it can get deadlier. And that's the thing that I've heard about 5e and a lot of RPGs is it's the action economy. Whichever side gets to swing more is probably going to win.
Okay.
If they're at a point of certain parity, whoever has more attacks wins is basically what it is. And before we go too deep down this rabbit hole, one thing that I think is interesting that we both sort of jumped to when we were thinking about this topic is defining an encounter as combat
and
leaving out the other pillars of play, exploration and social encounters.
That's a great point.
Which is why I think we should probably expand this to games beyond D&D 5e, or I at least intend to, because it's one of those things that we think about a lot with balancing encounters. And I think you can probably actually up our games more if we not only think about the combat encounters, but think about the difficulty of our social encounters and the difficulty of our exploration encounters as well, and see if there's ways that we can work within the existing mechanics of a game, like the DC in Dungeons and Dragons, or if there's other subsystems that we can engage with or ways to tweak that. I think that could probably be a pretty interesting topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So stakes.
So, all right. The reason why I think you're exactly right about making this not just about combat is because you could plan for a magical disaster encounter and you could have 3 player characters who are participating in that challenge, who are very physically capable, and you could watch them with glee as they all roll some of the worst rolls you've ever seen in your life and just completely shit the bed on that encounter. And when you talk about stakes, like, what happens, you have to take that into account, right? Like, you have to think of the worst case scenario, right? Like, in my case, I created a magical disaster, like a spiraling vortex that's sucking everything up into it from the room, including the player characters. Well, what happens if they all fucking roll a 1 and just completely, mess it all up?
Well, we found out.
Right. And so, like, you guys asked me after that encounter, what was on the other side of the vortex? Because you guys were able to pass the encounter despite the fact of royally fucking up almost all of your rolls. And I ended up saying, like, the truth, like, oh, it just puts you in this different part of the campaign. You guys have actually already been there. It involves 4 spiders that have been fused together that you didn't kill last time, and you'll have to fight it again. It sends you back there, right?
Yep.
So, like, is that a good example of stakes,
Well, I mean, like, the stakes on that one weren't surprisingly lethal, but I'd still say it was a challenging encounter. Because I think you're not giving yourself full credit for the listeners out there as he describes this. There was a vortex. There was the movement in the vortex space where everything's getting sucked up. And then there's also a chessboard puzzle that we have a piece to that if we can place it in the right one, we can shut down the portal before we're all yanked into the mouth of oblivion. Unfortunately, as we tried to maneuver towards the board, one perceptive member of the party having noticed it's not moving, unlike everything else that, like, nail by nail is just getting sucked into this thing, we just started rolling terribly. Like, yeah, I rolled a 1, I think, for my first attempt to maneuver through, and then I think I rolled like a 5 for my next one. And I have like +5 to athletics and shit. I'm a monk.
Yeah. Like, I gave the party the option of acrobatics or athletics, and from the 3 of you, you all excel in either athletics or acrobatics or both.
Yeah. So I think from a player perspective, that encounter was challenging because of the way the dice shook out.
Okay.
I don't know how to judge it other than the way that we played it. Because, like, what would have happened? And so because it was challenging, but not instantly lethal, I mean, we were all having a good laugh and groan about how terrible our die rolls were. It was really engaging as a player to play through that scene. Was it engaging for you to run?
It was. It worked out a lot better than I was hoping.
Yeah.
Because the key part of to diffuse the encounter, as you said, is putting the piece that you have onto the chessboard, as you phrased, just the right spot. But I'm going to share a secret with you, Jesse.
It was wherever they put the chess piece?
It doesn't matter where you put it. And I had written like, this is a perfect example of how people like me when we run games, we overthink everything.
Yeah.
I had devised a strategic placement of pieces to illustrate, potential options based on a made up game that doesn't exist. And then it would be incumbent on me to relay that information to my player character so that they could put the piece in the right place. And if you didn't in the original version, you get sucked into the vortex. It doesn't turn it off.
I watched you as we started asking questions about the game. I watched the regret flash across your face for a second of like, why couldn't I have just picked a normal game that already exists? Because we were like, we're going to have to learn how to play this game. All this portal's going on the wall.
Right. And instead, what I decided to do then was be like, you know what? Does it really matter where the piece gets put? I just have to make it seem like it matters. So I described each piece. I described where those pieces were. I described that the pieces were modeled after characters of significance in the lore of the world. And then I watched as Kurt, gave us some thought on where he was going to put that piece, and it didn't matter. He just had to put it on the board to turn the thing off. So I was very satisfied with that.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the point that I'm trying to get to as we're winding through this introduction to the episode is like, what is the cost of having an encounter that's too challenging? Why does it matter to think about how challenging our encounters can be? So what are some things? I'm sure you've had experience running an encounter where it's, just not really hard. You thought maybe it was, but it's just really, really easy. What do you think the players are going through when the challenge falls short? Or alternatively, if the challenge is really, really way too hard?
How do we define these things? Because as you have pointed out to me, I have made encounters that are too difficult because I don't give additional information. You coined the term for this as the mat wall in the past. So I'm actually going to turn this over to you, and same question, because like, I don't know how to properly gauge the difficulty of a non-combat encounter. Like, I've had encounters that have gone way too fast and I've felt bad, or have been too easily figured out, or have been like, oh shit, I didn't give them enough information, So like, what do you think? Like, I'm kind of drawing a blank on this one.
Well, I mean, like, I think from a PC perspective, if a combat is too easy, I don't think players are usually too mad about that. They're like, yeah, we kicked those guys' asses. And
True. As
a DM, maybe you're kind of feeling like, why did I bother to write that one? Like, they didn't use any resources. It was so fast. With social encounters, I think it gets really, really, really sticky because, like, it's very easy for a social encounter, if you're not thinking about it, to go off the rails and block all story progression and block game flow. Same thing with exploration, whether you are moving through a trackless wilderness or just like searching the room for a clue. The same thing can happen in exploration, where if you're not fine tuning it enough, it just locks the game up. People stop having a good time. They get bored, see previous episodes. And so that, I think that's why it matters, is because like, people tune out, they lose their immersion, we lose story progression, and we lose game flow when we don't have the right level of challenge to our encounters. Would you agree?
Yeah, that definitely does clarify it for me. I mean, I'm a fan of the player characters, and 5e makes that ridiculously easy to do. And I think that I wonder if most people are missing something, or maybe they're just seeing it differently. The way I see Dungeons and Dragons is like, you get, everything reset with a long rest, and they can long rest whenever they want. Yes, you can put consequences and timers. Like, you only have 2 days to find these lost kids, right? The cow has told you so.
The cow lies, and it breaks my heart.
Right? So, like, you can do that kind of stuff. But in general, like, you can't expect every GM, every game mother, dungeon master, or storyteller to, like, use that method of, like, consequence and timer, or consequence and threat, or whatever the case may be, right? Like, you just have to allow the fact that, like, the player characters can long rest whenever they want. They can take an unlimited amount of short rests. They're ridiculously overpowered, and you're throwing magical items at them as if out of a piñata. So, like, 5e is a game that's just saying, like, hey, this is geared towards the player character success. So, like, my mindset is, like, how do I help them win? And how do I help them win in a way that makes them feel like they earned it? Like, the spider encounter, like, you guys didn't kill the spider. It was 4 spiders fused together. And I set up the encounter that, like, the whole point of it was to rescue the person, grab the prisoner, get out of the room. You guys didn't kill the spider. Was that a fulfilling encounter for you guys?
Heck yeah. Like, that was a great one.
Have you ever run an encounter that you felt like the player characters didn't have a feeling of fulfillment from it? Like I can't think of too many.
The fight against the ambushing bandits and the start of the Rifts game,
Okay.
which is part the challenge wasn't necessarily there. No one was really quite sure of the stakes, whether that was threatening or not, because and people didn't know the mechanics of the game yet.
Right. Okay. So there's an asterisk on that one, but I do understand. Excuse me. I do understand what you're saying.
Yep. So when we think, I'm going to change gears a little bit, if that's okay.
Totally okay.
When we think about how to, like what influences the difficulty of an encounter, I think we need to start proactively even before the GM prep or the game session. And the first thing that I think, and this is true for any system, not just 5e, party composition.
Okay.
Is a thing that is probably going to influence like the challenge of the encounter. If you have a party that's like entirely, we played a campaign once down here that the working title of it was Palindiana Jones.
Okay.
And so we were all paladins of this one church, all with different like oaths. It was a 5e game, all with different oaths. But our job was basically like to go recover relics of the church.
Okay.
So when the party balance is 5 dudes that wear heavy armor, hit like a Mack truck, and can all heal,
Right.
and all have high charisma scores, like maybe if you want to have a challenging encounter, you should have something where they have to make an Arcana check. Like,
sure. Yeah.
because it's not going to be a fight. That's a challenge to these guys. And it may not be a social encounter unless there's mitigating story themes. Like, it's a social encounter with the bishop who has been selling some of these artifacts. But you also know he's too powerful and renowned to really move against.
Right.
So then you have to like start thinking story for challenge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I would be really interested. Like, obviously, you'd have to bump up your encounter level difficulty for combat. But like, so let me ask you this: like, how long did you guys play that game for? And was it just like a total like? Did you guys just stomp through everything? Like, was there any mitigating circumstances that kind of equalized out the overpowered nature of the party?
Well, one of them for me was my character was a dwarf, and he was flame scarred of an accident where he thought his son had been killed in this, forging accident. Like, why not? But he hadn't been, and it turned out he was like one of the lieutenants for the bad guys. So we got in running fights a couple times with my son, and I'm like, you can't kill him. Like,
right.
He's mine. Like, you can't, like,
yeah,
he's dishonored my clan, but I love my boy. Like,
okay. So the difficulty in that regard was like in a story capacity, which is what I think you were getting at.
Yeah. If you're just like, and I think that's probably the way to go. I would recommend in general with 5e is that you need to have the difficulty be in a narrative sense, the story most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's probably not going to be the DC, and it's in 5e, it's probably not going to be the fight.
Yeah. I mean, like, fights, I've seen fights be extremely unfulfilling for player characters simply just because, and this is a problem all editions of D&D have had that I've run or played and going back to second edition advanced, but like D&D can just kind of slog on forever.
Yeah.
And I think that like, even if you had a combat encounter where it was like very, like, even if it was just a cakewalk, as long as it doesn't take forever, I think that can still be meaningful, and I think maybe the same rules kind of apply for like exploration or social. Like, how long do you really want them to be negotiating with this diplomat from another country? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think this should take that long. Like, what do you think about that?
One really cool example with that whole timer thing, you've heard me talk before about the scarcity die and the black hack.
Yeah.
So, Call of Cthulhu, right, is an investigative game Like that's going to involve researching stuff in a library, like looking for clues and also like talking to people and kind of working them over conversationally. There's a Cthulhu hack, which is the black hack, but for Call of Cthulhu. And your investigative resources. Okay, I should explain the scarcity die in case you haven't caught an episode
Yes.
where I talk about it. The scarcity die is anything that you have a limited resource of that might go away has a die set. I think the highest is probably D12, like in most systems. It starts at a D12. And whenever you use that, like if you had an ammo die for your bow as a ranger, after the encounter, you're going to roll your scarcity die. If you roll a 1 or a 2, the die steps down to the next lowest die. So a D6 becomes a D4. Which also, because it's now a higher number range, means the enchant that spirals out faster and faster and faster. And I think really creates a compelling sense of like need.
Right. Yeah.
So in Cthulhu Hack, your scarcity die are flashlights for looking for clues and smokes for handing them out while you're talking to people.
Right.
So the very fact that you're resourced to do this thing, to find the clues you need to, like, you know, banish the monster or stop the evil cult or whatever, the fact that those are running out as you use them, I think creates an interesting gameplay loop of thinking how you shepherd those resources while still trying to achieve your goals, which creates a satisfying challenge.
Right. Right. Now, the Cypher system uses like a physical attribute, a mental attribute, well, like a mental attribute and a social attribute.
I'm not sure if it's exactly social. There's kind of like there's one that's
social.
being fast. There's one that's like mindy stuff.
Yeah. My point is like when you try to do things in the Cypher system, it uses up those attributes as resources, doesn't it?
You can.
Okay.
You can. That's one of the things I really like about it. You have a pool and you're going to roll your D20, but you can burn your hit points, basically, because each one of those 3 stats has its own hit point tracker. Like you can burn those to lower the difficulty number. It's also, if you take damage of that kind, it lowers as well. So, yeah. That creates that play arc. And I'm gonna come back at you real quick on this one because this is also a challenge thing. Okay. Well, okay, no. Well, this is not party composition. I'll circle back to that later.
Okay.
I disagree about the long rest, but we've had this conversation like 10 times. So,
why do you for the listeners? Why do you disagree about the long rest?
Because I think if you're doing story first or fiction first gaming. And this also comes from some of my old school sensibilities. If the party decides we can take a long rest whenever, and they take a long rest in the dungeon, I think as a DM, you have license to fuck with it.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, the dungeon is not safe. This is not a hotel. There are monsters.
It would be cool if it was, though.
If you want it to be fair in Fate, have it be wandering monsters. Like, roll a D6, and if it's a 1, like roll it for like every 2 hours of the watch. If there's a 1, there's a random encounter, and then you got a random encounter table in the back of your monster manual. Just going to roll, like, okay, this thing comes along, and hey, maybe it doesn't even want to fight or eat them.
Yeah,
maybe it wants to fuck them. I don't know. Have you ever met a rust monster in Heat? It's unpleasant.
No. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because like you don't even really need any excuses, but you could be like, look, it smells really bad down here. You guys just can't get to sleep, or you can sleep, but you only get like the equivalent of a short rest.
Yeah.
Or half of your long rest resources wise, right?
Like, to create some interesting dramatic tension in the party, I'm going to need you to make a DC 15 con save to get over the stink down here. And if not, you're not going to be able to sleep and take a level of exhaustion.
Right. Exhaustion is the other thing you could do, right? Like you could say you can take a long rest, but it is so stressful down here in this dungeon that you will take a level of exhaustion after your long rest. It won't go away when you take a long rest. Like, yeah, you could totally do that. You're not wrong, but my question is like, is the average game mother dungeon master storyteller, is the average dungeon master going to implement those kind of things, or are they going to get guff from their party where they're like, oh, come on, it doesn't say anything like that in the rule book. You and I know that that's bullshit. I'm the GM, argue all you want. Like, you could just not play in my game. That's fine. Like, you know what I mean? Luckily, I don't have to do that because I got great players. But, you and I are hashtag blessed in this regard,
Well, you can just say that, like, the rules for that actually are in the DMG, which no one has ever read. So,
right.
like, then you're good to go.
Yeah. I have also played around games and played in games where the party did not long rest on purpose. Like, they just kept going. And they were like, man, it has been a brutal 48 hours. Can we take a long rest? And you're like,
yeah, that was us. It just like, it didn't make sense. Like, we were on this timed thing. Like, we had to catch this guy. If we took a long rest, he'd be in the wind, and we needed him to, like, So story reasons. The story is what made it effective as a challenging encounter.
Yeah.
Next broad category.
Yes, sir.
Influencing encounter difficulty, player skill level.
Okay.
So this one, I got to ask you, because you got a party with me in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I think about player skill versus character skill.
Right. Now, are we talking about just general player skill, or are we talking about mastery of the game, of the mechanics, of the class? You know what I mean? Like, what's our variables here?
I mean, say you got someone who's like, it's their second game of D&D ever, and they're at the same table as me, and you're running that game. How do you balance the encounter or make it satisfying with...
I mean, I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say about this too, but like, very quickly...
I'm terrified you're going to ask this one back to me because I have no good answer.
Like, I have a great answer. I've never had to deal with this problem. I've never had to deal with a lack of familiarity being a problem at the table. When I have because I've played with Jesse in many different games, and there's always been new people involved in those games. And usually what happens is that, like, I'm, again, maybe hashtag blessed here, but like, I have never had a bad new game experience with a person who's brand new to a game or just role-playing games in general. Like, the usual problem is they're just too timid or meek about what they want to do, and they're asking for permission a lot, or they're not, like, they're afraid to take the spotlight, or they're afraid to interject the thing that they want to do. But once you enable them or empower them to do that, they're like, okay, I got it. How would I do that? Well, you would roll D20 and add this, this, and this, and, go for it. And they're like, cool, I do it. They're like, oh, well, you hit. Cool, I have another attack, right? You're like, you do actually. Like, all right, I'm going to thrash this werewolf. And then there you go, right? I've actually never had this problem. I've had advanced players at the table like Jesse, and then I've had brand new players at the table, and it has not impacted the difficulty of the encounter at all. Like,
yeah, so, I think too, the actual answer for that one is because I have had a table with like 12 players, some of whom have never played a role-playing game before, and some of whom have definitely played role-playing games before. And I think really all it is, and this is sort of, I think, the sub-theme of this entire episode, is just being reactive at the table, like paying attention, like know your party balance or the party makeup when you start planning your encounters, and think to that, or just Mike Shea, like, review the PCs before you like start planning your session. Right. I think it's just reacting at the top and giving the new players a little bit more help. You would know, you could do one thing that you might try is like just giving them a little bit of hand holding and then letting them go. I did this with a player in my Shadow Dart game who had just like I think her first character died, and then she plus came back with a warlock because we're doing entirely random rolls. I'm just like, oh yeah, character died, go to shadowdarklings.net and then just hit the go button. And then what do you got? Okay, there you go. Maybe it's her first character. Anyway, she's a warlock who worships Shun the Vile, who is like the archetypical mother witch who loves secrets and bones and fire.
Perfect.
And very quickly, when I just reminded this player about Seraphine's connection with Shun the Vile, she went from being like Wallflower to be like, well, I'm going to burn this corpse as an offering to Shun the Vile and ask what we could know. And I'm like, there we go. Now you're playing some D&D. Have at it.
We got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a player in our current 5e game where next game I'm going to remind them, hey, you are a spore druid, and there's a thing you haven't been doing every turn in combat, which is as a reaction, you can do a thing. You can do a spore thing. I've played Baldur's Gate 3. Like, you can do a spore thing. I looked it up. It's the same in the tabletop version. So person hasn't been using it, and have your encounters gone south? Like, have you guys like failed combat encounters?
No,
you haven't.
No.
It's been fine.
I think so designing for the right difficulty. We've kind of touched on it, but let's stumble directly into the face of this red dragon. Calibrating the challenge level, to me, I don't know. I loved the idea of the challenge rating system when I first encountered it because of my analysis paralysis of wanting an entire ecosystem that made sense in a dungeon and worrying about encounter design. And then I was like, okay, here's a system, I can just do it. And now I'm like, you don't even need to do it. Like, because one, in 5e, it doesn't matter. Your PCs are going to live. It's fine.
Yeah.
And listeners out there, if you have different experience with 5e where it's super fatal and you're just getting characters killed all the time, I would love to hear about why.
Please write in.
Please write us at jauntymantis@gmail.com.
Yeah, I want to know why. How is this happening? Because I want to make encounters more difficult.
Just send that one to me, care of Jesse, not to Maddie, maybe, because I play in his game and I don't,
jauntymantis@gmail.com.
I need my plot armor. All right. So, yeah, challenge rating is one system for combat, but other RPGs don't have a challenge rating. Like, say, when I was running the Rifts game.
Okay, how does Rifts do it?
That it doesn't.
Then how do you know what to throw at the party?
You just throw things at the party.
Cool. I love it.
And there it goes. Like, I had that fight with the chupacabras in the bar, I had no idea how that was going to go. I knew they had a pretty low amount of mega damage. And so, and I knew they didn't hit very hard. So I was like, I can do a couple of them, but I don't really know how it's going to go.
I mean, yeah, you're essentially doing what I do in the 5e D&D game I'm running, where it's like, I purposely have all of my encounters set to a hard or deadly difficulty level by default, but I make it a bunch of monsters instead of a single monster, because I don't want a single monster to like one-shot a PC. Like, I don't want them to just club a PC and kill him in one hit. I want a bunch of critters, like a big encounter. And if it was just one creature, I would lower that difficulty level down to counteract that aspect. It sounds like you're doing a similar thing. Like, if the Chupacabra in the Rifts game, like you just said, it sounds like they were appropriate to have a bunch of them in the encounter. So you were pretty safe that they weren't going to just like completely destroy the party, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you do use your own metric for it.
Well, I think like you could do that kind of with hit dice in older versions of D&D.
Okay.
I think one of the things that you do, and I've been doing this in Shadowdark a little bit, players don't listen to me, and then I feel absolved of guilt. is with old school gaming where there is no fair way to set challenge rating, but you get the feeling that this might go really, really poorly for the PCs. Like, say you have a group of third level Shadow Dark PCs, and the random encounter table that they've just run into is like a level 13 monster.
Yeah.
I might give you an idea there that those numbers being 10 apart, that's probably bad. I think you should feel free to say you can always run.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you do not have to stand and fight what is basically Slender Man. Like, you can run away from Slender Man.
Right.
He might just grab one of you, and then the rest of you will be saved. Like,
You could also communicate this with like a feeling of dread.
yeah,
You know, you don't have to just come out and say it, although you certainly can. I certainly have. Like, but you can communicate this in other ways. You can just you can use in the description, or you can say like there's this feeling of dread. You are all like your skin goes ice cold, the hair goes up on your arms and the back of your neck. Like there's this feeling of terror, and the pit of your stomach is empty as you watch this thing move from house to house, plucking people out and eating them or whatever. You can convey the idea that they should not be fucking with this creature that you have in the game for some fucking reason.
yeah, this is set dressing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
I keep
love
getting
it.
this close to, like, with the rifts too on the encounter difficulty, like, because some of the things I'm just like, they have these tech modern military forces, and so I need to take a look at like the average Triax and the new German Republic, right, at war with the Gargoyle Empire of southern France, right?
Right.
The average infantryman's rifle tickles a gargoyle.
Okay.
Like, and like a squad of 10 infantrymen, if they all line up their shots on a gargoyle swooping down at them and they all go full bore, might do a quarter of that gargoyle's health. And I'm just like, huh, what's the intended encounter differential here? Like, I don't know. You can always run. And I think the next point that you really should do with your encounters, and this is one of those things, I don't think you should count on a challenge rating for encounters.
Okay.
Because there is no challenge rating for social encounters or exploration encounters. That's
Right.
only for combat ones, and I don't think it necessarily makes a great judge. Though it is an impressive feat of mechanical chicanery. The way it works in 5e, like, hats off, that's really cool. The sliders just hit points, but very well calculated hit points. Yeah, I think what you can do is encourage players to use the environment and think creatively with what they do, and then reward them mechanically for that.
Yeah.
And do that reactively if you see things going south.
Right.
Again, this is like, there's this great essay called about the old school Renaissance, like, what does it mean? And it's like, rulings, not rules. And has this example of this guy who's just like, I want to jump off the second story and stab this guy with a dagger. And the GM says, okay, cool. Yeah, you can do that. However, and it's, if you hit, it's going to be a critical hit, or you'll get your sneak attack. Like, it'll double the damage. But if you miss, you're going to fall and take damage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no
how
rule.
much?
There's no rule for that.
Yeah.
Like, in there, you know? Or I think it was a Mike Shea one that's just like, if somebody like wants to do something cool with the train, like there's a fireplace in the room or like a chandelier, and they want to drop it on somebody, you're like, do you want to hurt them or do you want to stop them?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
That
then
works.
they're just like, hurt them. I'm like, okay, roll your attack. You can roll your weapons damage, and then you narrate the fire being the thing that does it. Or if
Right.
you want to stop them, okay, roll your attack. They're going to get a saving throw. They fail. All right, they can't move this turn because they're
Right.
pinned under the candelabra. Like, you can really, like, how do you coax that out of people? I think you have to start suggesting it a little,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
or remind them, hey, there's these cool things in the room you can play with.
Yeah. I have tried this and had found that you have to be very specific with this. You have to be like, well, there is this thing sitting in the boat right there. I've mentioned it 3 times now. Like, you know what I mean? You have to be very purposeful, because I do this with the threat and the timer and the treats. Mark your bingo card index RPG. I've found that I've had to be pretty deliberate about what the treat is.
Well, that's a skill, though. It's a skill that I think we're all picking up with as this becomes more and more the format of our encounters.
Yeah.
Like, it's a thing we're all going to listen for. Because, like, the water tower with the fire beetles in the first one, I don't remember even hearing you say the water tower.
Your character was leaning up against it practically.
Oh, yeah. I missed that.
Like,
but
I
with
think
the
you
glowing
narrated
arrow and the spider that was already injured, I caught that one.
Well, that one I was like, I need to put something in there that nobody would miss. You know, there is a glowing arrow in part of the body of this monster.
So I didn't miss it.
Yeah.
I just didn't have a ranged attack to do anything about it. I was busy actually engaging with the challenge of the encounter, just rescuing the people and capturing the bad guy, rather than just going and taking hit points off a giant spider.
Yeah. I think you narrated yourself leaning up against the water tower. I wish I could go back and check. Because I remember finding it hilarious that, like, somebody was doing this, but it doesn't matter now. Okay, cool. How do you build encounters in, like, Shadowrun? Like, I've never actually run Shadowrun. I have run Shadowrun. What did we do for Shadowrun? I think I ran a pre-run.
I think we just had, like,
that's right. We didn't care.
We didn't. We didn't send the Rinreku Red Samurai after the brand new PCs. Like, we just had some rent-a-cops.
You just have to use common sense.
Yeah. We just used common sense. Before there was encounter level, before there was challenge rating,
yeah,
we just used common sense.
Yeah, I'm not going to have this street samurai face off against the party. I'm going to use the Corpo security guards.
Yes. I'm not going to do this dude with wired reflexes 3 and, like, the best gun made in the world,
right.
mil-spec armor.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, interesting thing about this, and again, I'm sorry, this is a challenge. This is a combat example again. Like, in our One Ring game recently, right? We fought 2 stone trolls at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, our plans to lure them out and ambush them did not go well. Luckily, we spotted them before they could ambush us, but it did not go well. Thank goodness for the doughtiness of Durin's folk, because the dwarf took like 2 clubs to the head from a troll and stayed fighting.
That's awesome. So what happened?
We defeated them.
Okay.
Really, really surprisingly, because, like, I don't want to go too inside baseball on this one, but it's really interesting when you roll to hit. You have a strength target number that's determined by your strength rating. It's like basically your strength rate, 20 minus your strength rating is your strength target number. So, like, my character's strength target number is 15. In order to succeed on any strength-related roll, I need a 15 or higher.
Interesting. Okay.
And, like, so my weapon skill in this case was longsword, which I have 3 dots in. So I'm rolling a d6 for each one of those, and then I'm rolling the fate die, which is a 12-sider. And the 12-sider goes 1 through 10, and then it has the Gandalf rune in the Eye of Sauron. So the Gandalf rune is, you succeed, good job. Like, that's the critical hit. Though it goes ahead. The Eye of Sauron is, count this die as a 0. Hope your d6s were good.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so you have to roll over that, and then it's modified by an enemy's parry rating if they have one.
Well, I think this brings up an interesting topic then. Like, when creating a game, is it valuable to put in things that are way too difficult for the party? Like, is it better to like vary up the encounter difficulty? Like, it seems like there's a lot of fun in things that are way too difficult, like whether that be a challenge rating 13 Wicker Man or like, two trolls, right? Like, um,
Well, the two trolls is not as bad as it could be.
it sounds like it would be fucking horrible. I've seen the movies and read the books, god damn it.
Yeah, it was pretty terrible. We had a couple lucky shots.
Mm-hmm.
Um and like I mean, yeah, Louisa rolled a critical. They're using troll parasols because it was
Okay.
daytime in this ravine. And so they have these like horrible hide on pole things that they're squatting under that kind of camouflage them, but so they can just come out and grab us. And
Oh
Louisa's
wow.
wood elf like shot the head off one of the parasols, and that troll turned to stone. And then we were
Nice.
left with the other one that we were able to just chip down. But like
Yeah.
they have like 60 endurance, and like typically, if I make a successful attack with my longsword, I'm doing 5 damage.
Okay.
That's it. I need to do that 12 times to this troll before it,
Yeah.
crushes me.
And then it seems like to me that the answer to how hard should an encounter be, because that sounds like a threat, a timer, and a treat option, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
you can throw a super difficult, challenging, badass monster at a party, but if you leave a way for them to defeat it effortlessly, as long as not effortlessly, like they had to put in the effort to do it and figure it out. But if you could come up with like a way to, get past or defeat, kill this monster like you're just describing, I mean, do you think that that should be an essential part of every combat encounter or every social encounter? Or because I can imagine social encounters being the easiest way to represent that, right? Like, you figure out, like, I'm a huge fan. We haven't done this a lot recently, but I'm a huge fan of social skills getting you information instead of making it an I win button in the conversation.
Yeah,
Like,
I
I'm not a
don't like
fan.
I win button in the conversation.
Yeah, which is what it's commonly used as, the diplomancer, right? Like, you could just talk anybody out of anything, right?
The Strange Tale of Lord Barrington.
The Strange Tale of Lord Barrington. Okay.
Do you know The Strange Tale of Lord Barrington?
No.
Well, not from a Jedi. Okay, sorry. There was this silly internet example of like this bear that had like a charisma of 30 and just kept passing the bluff checks to convince people it was a human, and it got became a noble in this kingdom, and it was Lord Barrington. And there was one guy who had rolled the insight over the bear's ridiculous bluff and was just like, that's a bear. It never been fine. So yeah, I think the current edition of 5e clarifies it a lot better. With like I think the DC now for a social encounter is like the intelligence of the creature.
Okay.
But there's like a little table about how far you can get them to go based on their attitude.
Okay.
So to me, like you got to have an ask of them before you roll something. Like, tell me this piece of information. But the way you engage with that thing is through in character role play or through, treats of something that this person wants, like basically leverage.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
I tried, but there's one game I was reading recently that explicitly says, like, what is your leverage? Oh, it was Soulbound, I think. Soulbound has a system. It's like, what's your leverage? Like, do you have leverage on this person? Okay, they're not going to do what you want. Like,
Right. Right. Like,
bye.
that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, the great equalizer is that combat requires you to roll dice to meet specific results, but it's not like the player character could circumvent that by getting up at the table and start bench pressing fucking gaming books. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if you have somebody at the table who's a fucking black belt or like a military enthusiast or like practices like fencing as a hobby. Like they still have to make the rolls. But on the other side of that in social encounters is you have that charming person at the table is just like the player is just a charming person, or maybe they're charming and quick-witted, and you have a social encounter, and without rolling a single dice, they are like talking circles around your NPC and putting you in a, your character in a difficult position. And it's like that shit's overpowered. Like, you know what I mean? So
That's why I stopped playing face characters.
there you go. So like, like you shouldn't, that's the other side of that equation, right? Like a challenging encounter that's not a combat encounter, like difficulty levels should be like, what do you need to have leverage? What are the kinds of leverage you can have? And what do you need to do and say to get it? And then once you have it, what are the consequences of using it? Because that guard may let you past him into the watchtower because you figured out the leverage on him, but then he may try to get rid of you after that, or may try to find some way to fuck you over, depending on how you go. This is what I like about the dungeon world, or apocalypse world, I should say, system, where it's like you can get a success with a consequence, or you can get a failure. You know what I mean? That's a much more preferable method. Like, if you're going to have a social encounter and you do use rolls or whatever to get the result, you may get a success with a consequence, and that may be that like you have put leverage on the guard, but you scared the shit out of him, and once you guys get through, he's going to do whatever he can to fuck you over after that. Because you put the fear of God into him by, with that intimidating social interaction. So, yeah.
Well, then we have one left to talk about, which is perfect because you sent me a wonderful text message the other day, because exploration as encounters and the revelation you had and decided to share with me via text instead of as a banter is that, tell me if I get this wrong, the Cypher system is the perfect system for running Dark Sun.
Yeah, which I wish we had thought of and explored in the bonus episode we did about what system should Jesse run Dark Sun in. I wish it had occurred to me back then. But
are you kidding? My magpie GM habits, I'm so far beyond that now. Yeah, my immediate question, and I don't know if this counts as all exploration, but my immediate question, because everything else about your pitch was great. Ciphers are great for low magic. Like there's everything else that works makes it Dark Sun pretty well. I'm like, okay, cool. There's a way to do psionics. There's a way to do defiling, preserving. It's all there. My question is, how does Cypher handle dehydration? Because that part of exploration, the survival aspect, is something that I think can make an interesting challenge. And explicitly in Dark Sun or a post-apocalyptic game, I think is on the table if your players are down for it, in that pre-game discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer outside of the normal roles in the Cypher system. Like I have not actually come across that yet in the Cypher system. All the stuff that I sent you is stuff that I'm familiar with. Like, for the listener, the Cypher system is this elusive role-playing game that, like, I have yet to play in or run, but I'm completely in love with and often read the books for. So this is a part I haven't come to yet. So I just figured the normal rules of how a Cypher system game works would somehow play into that. Like, dehydration, essentially, if there's a level of exhaustion that's affecting the party, you could either make the cost to do things higher, or you could set whatever system, part of the system you're using to assess the challenge of it, you could raise that up, or you could use the GM intrusions, where by handing out experience points, you're forcing things onto the players, right?
Yeah.
Like mishaps or things that go wrong in the system. Like I don't know if they have a specific like survival set of survival mechanics, but it seems like whatever the baked in rules are is what you would use for that. And maybe that's not robust enough is what you're trying to say. Like,
No, I looked it up
okay.
because I did a Google search afterwards and found out
Okay.
that there is a post-apocalyptic cipher system book called Rust and Redemption that has rules for extreme heat, dehydration, and starvation.
There you go.
And I think this ties back in, like you could borrow this for another game. It's just incidental damage.
Okay. What is incidental damage?
It's just damage you just take from being in a place.
Okay.
I think I want to make sure I'm looking at the text again. Ambient damage. There we go. Ambient damage. Just being there causes like, lo-fi beats to study and die of dehydration by. Ambient damage is out there. It basically says like, if not relieved, you die from heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and death. So basically, every 12 hours you go without water, you take 3 points of ambient damage.
Okay. In Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, they had subdual damage, which was every time you took subdual damage from exhaustion or non-lethal hits or something like that total would increase. And when that met your hit point total, then you would pass out. Right? Is this something similar? Is that it's just dealing just general damage, or is this damage that's like easier to heal or in a separate category?
No, it's not damage from an attack.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think it can be resisted.
Okay.
Like it's just you have your pool, like your might or whatever, mind or whatever is like 15. You're like, all right, well, you went 12 hours without water, take 3 points of ambient damage. So you're going to pick one and drop 3 points on it. And then the next 12 hours later, you do it again. And I think that pacing is the thing that would inspire them, if you're using other best practice principles, to get creative and try and do something to find water.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my GM brain thinking Darkhan is like, oh yeah, you can track something and find an oasis, but you know what hangs out at oases?
Right.
Predators. So.
Yeah. So would that then meet the requirements for running Dark Sun in a Cypher system game for you? Like, is that robust enough, or
Yeah.
Like, how detailed does environmental difficulty need to be, right? Like, you could use a climbing check as an example, right? Like, they need to climb up the face of this cliff or this mountain, but if there isn't a meaningful risk involved, why not just let them do it? Like, I've run very few environmental encounters outside of like a swirling magical vortex being like a magic trap, but I don't think I've ever run like you're lost in the wilderness and have no food or water. And now you're starting to and there's mosquitoes that are biting you while you're sleeping, and there's predators out there hunting you. I don't think I've ever actually run those kind of encounters where survival actually matters. Because usually what happens is the person makes a survival check and then, you just narrate how they found food or something. How'd it go for you?
The trek down the Cinderwind coast through the jungle in Soulbound?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the one time we got into an area with environmental damage with the feculent Gnarlmaul, you all stayed out of range of the basically mortal wounds it would deal if you came close to it, and just rained hell on it from a distance. So
yeah,
wise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think in like things in the environment that can hurt you but don't kill you outright is the effective challenge. What's a good example of a really mean one I saw? Animated Spellbook.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the thing about his little ice monster?
No.
It's like Insidious. It like shows up, like it burrows out of the snow, looks all cute and little, like while you're made camp in the snow. It's like, what is it? And then it like spits water on the whole party.
Oh, okay.
And then runs away.
Uh-huh.
So now they're wet in the freezing cold and they can't rest and they start taking exhaustion and it just waits for them to get weak and then it comes back to eat them. Like,
I love it.
yeah, maybe not an effective challenge. All right. It's getting late and we're getting rambly. So let's wrap this one up with best practices. Final thoughts. First off, well, I'm going to say it. Agency. There's no one size fits all solution for any of the 3 pillars of play. You're going to have to know what your PCs are.
Yeah.
And react to them. Like your challenges that you build in encounters should reflect the group's makeup and the story tone and things you've discussed in a session 0.
Yeah.
Beyond that, common sense, like we didn't shout around, I think you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess my final thought would be the ultimate difficulty of your encounter are the consequences. You could have a combat encounter against monsters or NPCs more accurately that completely demolish the party. But if they take them prisoner and put them somewhere or tie them up because their motive, like if, let's say the party is fighting bandits in the forest, right? Like what is the motivation of the bandits? Do they just want the party out of the way so that they can go rob the town? Well, maybe they when they attacked, they downed every member of the party and then tied them up when they were done. And you can tell the party, I'm sure there's non-lethal hand wavy bullshit in 5e Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know about another game, but you could just be yeah, they kicked your guys' ass. They tied you up and to a tree and then they went and robbed the town. Yeah, you lost the fight, but none of the characters died. None of the player characters had to die for that to happen.
I'm pretty sure in 5e, the final hit, you can decide if it's lethal or they're just knocked out.
Well, then there you go. Yeah. You can run a social encounter with dire consequences, right? Or you can say okay, well, if you screw this up, what does that mean for the party? It's all in the perception of it. You can run a magical vortex disaster, right? But if they get sucked into the vortex, where do they go? Right? You can make it seem like the worst thing ever. You can say it gets super dark and cold and everything starts to disappear into the vortex and it's super scary. But what happens when they go through the vortex? Maybe they just get sucked into a room, or maybe they get put in a different part of the dungeon or whatever the case may be. You can still evoke a sense of danger or difficulty, but it doesn't have to mean that the party, lethality is not always the answer here.
Yeah, I think what you just said there, in the challenging encounter, evokes this sense of a real consequence without guaranteeing the negative consequence is what happens.
Yeah.
And so my other final thought on that is you just need to adjust on the fly.
Right.
Like you said with the bandits taking someone prisoner, bandits just want to eat usually. Yeah. They just want to eat. And the only thing they know how to do to eat is to beat up people who are too weak to defend themselves and take their food. So,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, adopt a fail forward mentality and write it into every encounter.
Yeah.
There's a success condition and then there's a fail condition, and both of them advance the characters and the story forward.
Mm-hmm. If the characters fail to overcome the bandits in the forest, they are taken prisoner because they can probably be sold for ransom to somebody, and they're taken to the camp where they meet a sympathetic bandit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe they get put into, maybe the guards capture them, they get put into the jail, and then there's that important NPC that you had scheduled for them to talk to in the town, and all you had to do is a little bit of improv and some creative shit behind the scenes, and boom, the NPC's in the cell. And that's how they actually ended up meeting their contact, the person they needed to talk to. And then you can stage a prison break, and it's all about how you present it, and your players will reward you for coming up with this creative encounter for them, where they thought that all was done when the big fighter went down and everybody was like, oh shit, they just killed Jimmy. You know, well, maybe they didn't kill Jimmy. You know, maybe you just all get captured.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anything else?
No, that's it. That's it.
All right. Well, in that case, get out there and plan some appropriately challenging encounters or some shit. I don't know.
Yeah. Keep playing those fucking role-playing games or some shit.
And if you want to talk to us, JohnTMantis@gmail.com. We've been Jesse and Maddie. Mantis out!